I've split up chapter one. May have mentioned this to you in an earlier lecture or not, I don't know, but I've split up chapter one into two parts because we're being encouraged to give you shorter lectures, pieces of lectures, so that instead of having one long lecture, in the last presentation of this class that I did along chapter one and chapter four are in one lecture put together that lasts about 100 minutes. Now, my own thinking about that is you can get up from it, put click on it, stop it, come back to it later, whenever you want to, and you're probably doing this even with the smaller parts of this lecture. But in any event, there's some psychology going on here in the thinking of our IT gurus telling us to try to keep it shorter. I suppose if you're actually physically downloading the lecture, it certainly is more beneficial for you probably to have smaller pieces of it. As for myself, to see a series of windows that I have to click on, to get through the week's lecture, to me isn't as attractive as having one one window that I just work my way through. But in any event, this is why I'll be splitting up chapters as I do these lectures this semester into smaller portions. And so this continues chapter one, but is the second part of this, and this will be the last part of chapter one lectures, by the way. And I'm really combining a couple of different things here: the three theoretical sociological perspectives, as well as research principles and how we go about conducting research in sociology. So the first part about this, the three theoretical perspectives, is actually a very important thing for you to keep in mind, and I want you to. This is one of those things you need to learn, which are what the three perspectives are, and how those three perspectives differ from each other. Sociologists don't have one kind of, again, monolithic kind of view of the world, but rather sociologists really kind of come in three or four different schools of thought about how they analyze the world and how they analyze human interactions and the impact of the world on human beings. And so that's what we're going to look at here, what those three perspectives are, just in a few slides. First, we want to talk about the fact that there's a theory, a sociological theory, and a theory is a general statement about how some parts of the world fit together and how they work. Again, in science, you know what theories are in science, and the scientific method of research will test out those theories to see whether they're true or not. Basically, this is what we're looking at in this lecture is how we go about doing that, and how the different theories kind of organize their thinking about human behavior through sociology. So they use these theories, sociologists use theories to conduct their own research. And the social problem then can be viewed from many different perspectives, and the three perspectives in sociology, some textbooks will give you four, but I'll explain that in a moment. But the three main perspectives are symbolic interactionist, functional analysis, and conflict theory. Sometimes you'll see the first referred to as symbolic or interactionalist perspective. The second perspective sometimes they're referred to as the functional perspective or functionalist. The third one sometimes simply conflict. But these are the three theories: symbolic interactionalist, functional analysis, and conflict theory. So first we take a look at symbolic interactionalism, what that is. The symbolic interactionalist perspective in sociology posits that individuals evaluate their own conduct by comparing themselves with others. This is a perspective that looks very much at how you or I, as human beings, impact the lives of individuals around us on an individual level, and vice versa, how the people in our lives affect us. So it looks at the interaction we have with others and how those interactions really create reality for us. And symbolic interactionalists will study such things as how we interpret symbols. One powerful example of a symbol is the cross, and what that means to individuals who are associated with Christian religions, and that simple symbol can bind people together. It can call up a lot of emotions in people who are very, very much involved in their religion. Can also be used in situations to stir up people, both positively and negatively. If somebody puts the cross in a situation where it's, really an unholy kind of circumstance, let's say, it can really fire up Christians to be angry about that. Um, so that's something symbolic internationalists will study. Another religion. The issue about cartoons and Muhammad being presented in cartoons and how that offends the Islamists around the world. The Muslims around the world are often offended because there's not supposed to be representation of Muhammad in their belief system, and cartoons and those kinds of things really offend those individuals. Again, another example that would be something that symbolic interactionists would really be very interested in studying and studying heavily. How we interact one-on-one with each other, how the way we dress perhaps communicates something about how we feel, and that it impacts other people around them, and they give us feedback about that, and it makes us feel better or worse, makes us feel more like we felt to begin with, or changes our perspective on how we feel. How people behave according to how they define themselves and others. These are things about being, well, Goffman talks about us being on stage, that Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage and we are actors in it, and that's sort of what this perspective looks at. How we act for people, how we put on roles and put on disguises in a way, depending upon the situation that we're in. So these are the kinds of ways that symbolic interactionists look at sociology. That's one perspective. Another perspective, and we will be studying these more, and I think fleshing this out more as the semester goes along, but functional analysis, or there's another name for this again, structural functionalism, the structuralist or functionalist you'll hear sometimes. The structural functionalist perspective views society as a whole unit made up of interrelated parts that work together. Although I am by no stretch of the imagination adept at mechanics, I just have this image of an engine, and in my head, even I guess this is something about being a guy, I don't know, but this is just one way that I can really understand this concept, that an engine is made up of a lot of different parts. I'm not saying, by the way, women don't understand this either. Please don't misunderstand me there. So we all as a group can understand this, that an engine is made up of a lot of different moving parts. There's cylinders and there's blocks and there's this and there's that. And I see again, I don't know a whole lot about engines, but I just know there's a lot of parts moving inside of my automobile engine. And then if one part goes out, the engine may continue to run, but it's not going to run as efficiently. The cylinders may start missing or something like this, and you feel it as you drive down the road. You can feel the car is not moving, and the engine's not running as smoothly as it should. So there's uncomfortableness in the way the engine works, and if you don't tend to that, it might throw off another part that makes it even worse, and eventually the car may just simply break down and refuse to run anymore, and you have to get that all repaired again before the engine runs properly again. Functionalists or structural functionalists look at society basically as an engine like that, made up of different parts. And all these little parts, these are the institutions is what they call them, the institutions of society, are the things that make our society run smoothly. And when institutions aren't functioning properly, that throws society off. And that's, according to structural functionalists, that has a lot to do with why it is that the world may not be working well sometimes. So the structure of society and how each part of society, again referred to as institutions, have certain functions that have to be filled for society to work properly, and what happens to society when those dysfunctions in those institutions occur. Much of the structure of the course really is designed around the institutions of our society. Institutions of our society include things like the family system, the legal system, education, religion, law. Well, I already mentioned law, didn't I? The media, those kinds of things. These are all institutions. And as you look through the plan for the semester in terms of the topics we're studying, many of those topics are about institutions and society. The third theory and the third perspective in sociology is the conflict theory, and this is the theory that's based on Karl Marx's thinking. And rather than focusing upon the institutions of society or upon interpersonal interactions, this takes a larger view and looks at how groups in a society compete for scarce resources, and in doing so then compete for power and authority constantly. There isn't enough in the world for all of us, according to this theory, and so because of that, people tried, well, essentially, the wealthy is what Marx would say, those that are in charge, those who own the means of production, or those who are in control of the government, use the power that they have because of controlling the means of production or controlling the government. They use that power to reinforce their own control and to keep other people out of power and out of control, to keep them in their place. And because of this, social classes emerge in a society, and this is a Marxist theory, is that this happens in capitalism, a capitalist society, the profit motive, so that the goal is really to gain as much profit if you're a businessman, but that also means that other people are paying more for it, which means they lose resources. So Marxist theory really looks at, because then the people who lose those resources become unhappy, and they challenge those that are in control, and that leads to a sort of a revolution of sort that we have seen some in history in the last 100 years or so with the Bolshevik Revolution, really kind of built upon Marxist theory. And so he says basically those in control, those who have the power, will use their power to maintain themselves in their spot and to keep others out of control and power. And so competition emerges in a society then, and it is this competition between the ruling class and the lower class, the workers and the owners, however you want to see this. It is this competition between those classes that causes society to evolve. And it can be a positive conflict because it can bring about positive change. Lots more about that as the semester goes along. So your three theories again, you have the symbolic interactionalist theory, the structural functionalist theory, and the conflict theory. And then each perspective really looks at data, let's say for instance, in a different light. And it's an example here. We'll take a look at marriage and divorce rates. This is over the last 120 years or so. You see the rate of marriage, and this, and then the rates of divorces. And actually you see both of them go up. Although divorces kind of levels off while marriage has continued to rise at a certain level, which is an interesting phenomena. So the different perspectives in sociology, the interactionists would look at the interactions between two people, and the interactions between them, and they may interpret this marriage and divorce rate chart by saying that industrialization and urbanization has caused marital roles to change and have led to a redefinition of love, marriage, children, and divorce. So this is the kind of thing that that an interactionist would look at, is how we define our roles in a family and how social change has caused all those roles to be redefined. When we talk about marriage and family later on in the semester, we'll be looking at that. A functionalist, a structural functionalist, would say that the social change erodes the traditional functions of the family. Remember, the family is one of the institutions in society, and so then as that institution weakens, the divorce rate increases. And functionalists would tell you, traditional functionalists at least would probably imply to you, that the weakening of the family system threatens the fabric of society. And you hear that a lot in politics, Other functionalists could see it other ways as well. Conflict theorists really are going to look at sort of, again, thinking about economics, they're going to look at the control of economics, and what they're going to see is that men, really, in our society, this is a patriarchal society, that men have control. Men are the ones who are put in charge of the household by traditional, and really the institutions support that. Religion supports it, and legal system supports it in many respects. The media helps to support that by the things they portray on television, for instance. And so men control the economic life. Women have few alternatives to marriage, and so the divorce rate stays lower because they really, bad marriage is better than what the alternative is for them. And a higher divorce rate reflects a shift in the balance of power between men and women. And so, again, you can see that sociologists can look at one chart and explain it in three different ways or more. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention is that you have the three perspectives in sociology, but there are also two levels of sociological analysis here. And if you've taken the economics course, you know that there's macroeconomics and microeconomics, and macroeconomics kind of looks at the larger trends in the economy, and microeconomics is much more about how the individual is impacted and involved in economics. And so you have a microscope, which takes something small and enlarges it for you to look at it and examine it very, very closely. And so macrosociology is really when we look at social interactions on a very small scale, and that perspective is symbolic interactionism, really is a component of microanalysis. It really looks at the interactions between two people or between a few people in a family system or something like that, right? So that's microsociology. Macro means larger. The macro picture is a bigger picture, and so macrosociology looks at the larger scale patterns in society, and the other two perspectives, the functional analysis and the conflict theory, are components of macro analysis. They really look at things on a much larger scale than an individual level, but look at competition between large groups, or how things fit together and affect society on a larger basis. So macrosociology and microsociology. And when we look in chapter 4, we're going to talk more about these things. So what we have looked at then this week so far, or this particular lecture, I should say, really is the three perspectives in sociology. That's the symbolic interactionist, the functional analysis, and conflict theory. A little application of each of those three, and then we also look at levels of sociological analysis that integrate the three sociological perspectives. Okay? All right. Now, moving on and shifting to maybe how these perspectives rather, develop their theories and test out their theories, and that's through sociological research. And this is not a research course. The university does expect that you are exposed to these concepts and that you understand some of these basic concepts, and so I want to walk you through this. But there are reasons why it's important for you to know this, but by the same token, I don't want you to get it too caught up and lost in having to memorize these things and remember them throughout the semester. I'm not a researcher. I am not an expert in statistics or research. I understand them mostly, but in practicing in the field, if you're going to be in human services, well, or social work certainly, but also just because you consume information about people all the time, whether if you listen to a political campaign, if you read a newspaper article, if you look at a magazine article about a particular topic, you're really, when it comes to do with human beings, you're being given a lot of information about groups, men, women, whatever it is. What can turn a man on, what's the weight of the man's heart, how children how we're impacting our children today, and how, and on and on and on and on. These kinds of things are all based on information that we're given about groups, and the foundation of that information is research. And there can be good research and there can be very bad research, and if research is done poorly, the information you get that you consume in the paper or the magazine or on the news or wherever it may be and if you're working in the field, that you use to help shape your own approaches to problems. If it's bad research, you've got bad information. And so it's useful for you to understand some of the basic concepts of research so that you can kind of be an intelligent consumer of it. Scientific research method here is 8 basic steps, and you've been looking at this while I've been yammering on about this. You pick a topic, you define what the problem is in the topic, you look at the literature, you form a hypothesis. This is you form a theory based upon the first 3 steps. You choose a method to test out that hypothesis. You collect data in your research. You look at that data and you analyze it based upon what you know from the literature and things like this. And then when you come up with a conclusion, you share those results. That's the scientific research model. Sometimes research is presented in tables. You get the results in tables, and so this is a little slide on how to read a table. And I don't know that I'm going to lead you through this, because I think for the most part you know how to read this table. But if you don't, I really would encourage you to come back and this is in your textbook, by the way, but also you can come back and examine this slide a little bit. But you can see one of the things I wanted to point out to you in this table is number 6, the source of the table, which is again usually listed at the bottom. And you can actually see, if you look on this slide, all the way to the bottom of the slide, it tells you this comes from Pearson Education. And from a text, from a text that was published in 2011. This actually is from an earlier edition of your textbook. But if you look in the box itself, it says the modification of Table 1 in O'Brien, 1975, in the source. You see that in the little blue strip across the bottom? 1975. Do you see that? Now, if this is something that you're comparing violent and non-violent husbands, and it's based on interviews with 150 husbands and wives in a Midwestern city who are getting a divorce. Think about 1975 and think about 2015. When it's coming up. It's 40 years difference, something like that. And so what are some of the things that maybe have happened since the 1970s that might be contributing to divorce now? There may be other things and more modern kinds of problems, more present day issues that also have something to say in that. And so I just wanted to point out to you that's one of the things. This is legitimate research. It's a good table, but it's also pretty old. And so you have to question whether or not the information is as valid today as it might have been 40 years ago. That's what I talk about when I say being an intelligent consumer of data that's put in front of you. So there's different ways that this data is collected, that this research is conducted, and one of the most common methods is a survey. And at one time or another, I believe all of us have been the subject of surveys, whether somebody calls you on the phone or stops you while you're walking through a mall, whatever it might be. So surveys can be done properly or not, because you have to make sure, first of all, that your sample is random and representative of the population. If you set up a survey, let's say in the student union or the commons of your university, and surveyed every third person walking past, let's say, or surveyed your friends, let's say, or did survey every third person walking past, would that be a good representation of the opinions of your community? Probably not, because the people walking past are likely college students or people associated with the university, which tends to be associated more with more of a liberal kind of viewpoint than other parts of society is, and probably the individuals there are as a group have more education and more information than the people in the community as a whole, and those kinds of things. And so it wouldn't necessarily be a good sample. You might be able to do a good survey of college students' attitudes or individuals associated with the university and their attitudes, but not a good representative sample of the attitudes of all Alaskans. Okay, so surveys have to be done properly. Questions have to be asked properly. Questions can lead individuals to a certain conclusion, and yes and no questions sometimes do that. The way questions are worded can inflame individuals and can pretty much predictably produce a certain answer, a yes or a no. So again, all different kinds of things that can happen in surveys that can turn it good or bad. Now, researchers can get a large number of people at one time using a survey, but oftentimes, if you're not stopping people, even if you're stopping people, people keep moving. They don't want to talk to you. There tends to be a low response rate, and sometimes people aren't truthful in surveys. Now, some terms to understand as we talk about research concepts: validity and reliability. Validity is, and these are scientific tests that can be done on tests themselves that kind of measure things. Like, first of all, validity measures how well does the research measure what it claims to measure. Reliability is how often will this operation give you the same result when it's repeated. So these are two tests of how much you can really believe what you're reading when you look at research. So the validity and reliability ratings, the higher they are, the better the more reliable. Now, reliable is the wrong term to use. The better the research is, I guess. And so I'll give you an example of this in psychological research. The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, MMPI, is a personality test that you often see administered to individuals who are given psychological tests. And the MMPI is, I don't know, 399 true-false questions. Depends on what version you take and those kinds of things. But basically, it's said to describe, the result of it is said to describe your personality as a human being, the personality of the individual who's taken the test, and what your tendencies are, and all those kinds of things. The validity and reliability ratings of the MMPI, at least the last time I've looked, continue to be very high. And so what that says is the likelihood is that it is measuring the different aspects of your personality like it thinks it is, and that if you took that test several different times over a period of time, you'd have to give some space in between it because there's reasons for that. But if you repeated that test over time, your results would likely continue to be very close to the same. And so the validity and reliability ratings on those are high, and that's like, I don't know, 0.75, 0.85, something like that, 1.0 being perfect. So you can count on pretty much believing what the MMPI tells you when you see it administered. Another popular test that we're all very familiar with is the Rorschach inkblot test. The inkblot test, and this is where the subject is given these cards with these inkblots on them, and basically told to tell a story about what the inkblots represent, and this is supposed to be a projection of the individual's personality and unconscious, I believe, onto this, and it's supposed to tell the researcher or the tester, the psychologist using this, some things about that person's personality as well. Well, despite the popularity of the inkblot test, at last reading for myself, the validity and reliability ratings of the Rorschach very, very low. And so what that tells you is that while there may be some interesting things that come out of the Rorschach, you may not be able to pin much on that in terms of whether or not it really describes the person that's being tested. So again, validity and reliability ratings, one of those things when you're looking at research, look around for that and see, is the number a high number? Because usually research studies will have validity and reliability ratings in them in the introduction somewhere. And if they're high, then you can pretty much figure it's good research. If they're low ratings, maybe not such great research. Another principle, independent variable, or other terms rather, independent and dependent variables. The independent variable is the variable that causes things to happen. The dependent variable is the variable that's affected by the other one. Variables are things, basically, two different things. And so let's say the theory is that the murder rate is reduced by the use of capital punishment. Now, there was a theory being here that because we have capital punishment in a society where there's capital punishment, there will be fewer murders. What is the independent variable there? The independent variable is the thing that causes it. And so in the statement, the murder rate is affected by the presence or absence of capital punishment. Capital punishment is the causal variable, right? It is the thing that's there, it's not, causes something to happen in the murder rate. And so the murder rate then is the dependent variable. Okay? Simple way of explaining that. Finally, and three other terms that are related to each other that are very useful and important to know, and that is the mean, the median, and the mode. Now, the mean is the term that is oftentimes, it's the same thing as the average. And so if you're looking at, let's say, what the income level is of a community, let's say, if you were going to determine the mean income of a community, you would take all the incomes of that community, add them together, and divide by the number of incomes that you've studied, and that is the average, right? That's the mean income. All right. The median income is different. It's the midpoint. And so instead of adding them all together and dividing by the number of incomes you studied, you set up all the incomes in what's called an array. The highest at the top, the lowest at the bottom, writing in every other income in the middle, in between those two, and then counting down and up from the top until you get to the very middle. And so the midpoint then is what is the median income for the community. Finally, the mode is what is most frequent, so that, no matter, you might have, for instance, well, okay, that's what it is. It's the most frequent. What occurs the most frequently in that population? What is the income you see the most frequently? Now, depending upon what you're trying to figure out, each of those might have be more useful than the others. For instance, if you're trying to get a real picture of the life of a community, the mode might be the modal income might be the thing you'd want, because what do most people make in this town? It doesn't matter if there's some, 3 millionaires that have these wonderful billionaires, let's say, that have these great mansions, at one end of the town. If the majority of people are living in hovels and substandard housing and, have to scrape to make ends meet, that really defines the community much more than those three very, very wealthy individuals. And so the mode income may be more interesting. Now, if you average them out and you put those 3 billionaire salaries in with all the salaries of the 500 other families that are making less than 20,000, the average income is going to be a lot higher because of those 3 billionaire salaries, and it's going to make it look like it's a much wealthier community than it is. See? Meanwhile, the median, which is the midpoint, may or may not be even more revealing, like how many people live above this income, how many people live below this income. That also defines another feature in the community. So when you look at surveys and where they're kind of collecting all this data and they're giving you like the results of, well, this is sort of what the average person in town is. The average person really the average person, or is it not? So there are three different terms: mean, median, and mode. You should get familiar with those terms. It's important terms to know. Different kinds of other kinds of research, and really I think the survey, this last slide should have been before the survey slide, I think. So survey is one type of scientific research. Another type of research is participant observation, where really, and this is where sociology can be fun if you like to, if you really like to get into the middle of research, and this is where the researcher observes individuals and the individuals are aware of those researchers' presence. In other words, that person is actually participating in whatever it is they're studying. There was a book published in the 1960s, early 70s perhaps, called The Hippie Trip, and it was written by a young couple who joined some hippie communities and they moved up and down the coast of California with these hippie communities and produced this book, which is a wonderful description of the hippie movement and what was going on, and really a great sociological study of it. And that was participant observation. Now, the individuals in those communes should have known, and I believe did, that the sociologists were sociologists studying them. And I think the theory is, of course, well, the advantage is that you get data there that you could never get any other way. But by the same token, the people that are being studied might act differently because they know they're being studied. I think the theory is with participant observation, longer term participant observation, at least, like in this book, and I can't remember the name of the authors anymore. But it's The Hippie Trip was the name of the book, and I think the theory was is that over time, they kind of just blended in, and people kind of just started being themselves over time. If you spend enough time in participant observation, that may be true. You get some really rich and interesting studies to read about from that kind of research. Unobtrusive observation might be somebody who observes individuals without the knowledge of that person's presence. Observing interviews behind a one-way mirror, for instance, would be an example of this. So you can observe individuals acting naturally and really much more true to themselves, but there are some concerns about ethics, that individuals are being studied and they're not aware of it, and ethics in research is a serious concern and something that we need to be very mindful of as we go about our work. Secondary analysis involves a researcher gathering information from other sources, reading other studies, looking at other people's data, and then kind of reanalyzing them, putting them together in a different way. And so, there's all sorts of different kinds of things here that are mentioned, like police reports and newspapers and documents and things like that can be used. So it's a good way to get information sometimes in a rather quick way. You can conduct some research and studies pretty quickly this way, but sometimes you might be using data that is inaccurate and you don't know it, or some data might be missing. Experiments, these are the kind of things scientists like to use. A little more difficult though with human beings because and if for instance, some of the research that is done, say for medical science, involves lab rats and different things like this, and there are organizations out there that have a lot of concerns about the use of animals in research for human beings and things like this. And so you can imagine that if you tried to do those same experiments on human beings, there would be a terrible outcry about it. And there have been some experiments, and you'll be reading a few of them, that actually did use human subjects in some situations that were probably bordered on unethical. But in any event, for this reason, experiments in and of themselves aren't commonly used in sociological research, but still, experiments can be a valuable source of information. When you read about experiments, you'll learn about two different groups. You'll hear about the experimental group and the control group. And the experimental group are those exposed to the independent variable. This is the thing that they're testing out to see will cause a change or not, and the control group is not exposed to the independent variable. One example of experiments that goes on today is what they call, I think, double-blind studies, and cancer patients are also given opportunities to participate in. Gosh, and I can't. The term escapes me at the moment, but it's where they're able to participate in tests of new things that are being used to challenge cancer, to overcome cancer and things like this, new medicines or whatever it might be, new techniques. When they sign on to those studies, when they're allowed to be in those studies, some of the cancer subjects are given the new medicine, some are not, and presumably those that are not given new medicine are still given the whatever is available to help them with this. But in any event, this is how they come upon advances in understanding how to cure illnesses and things like this through this kind of study. So that then you can kind of take that independent variable and isolate it as the cause of change, but the setting is controlled and isn't a natural setting, and so there's some disadvantages to this. And again, there are certainly a lot of ethical concerns about experiments with human beings as well. So we'll tie up this particular part of the lecture in the end of chapter 1's lecture by, again, just kind of reiterating that a researcher in sociological research has to be open and honest with the research subjects and should be free of personal biases. And if an individual is doing research because they're trying to prove a point, that's not going to be good research. The individual has to approach the topic with an open mind. And finally, there's research, also other studies that are mentioned in the textbook about protecting subjects from harm, and also about not misleading subjects, and the different kinds of things about that. So there are different considerations in ethical considerations in sociological research that we need to keep in mind. And so that gives you a rather quick and brief once over about research methods. Again, I think if there are things that I really want you to keep in mind and remember the most are these terms. These are terms that the validity, reliability, independent, dependent variable, and mean, median, and mode. These are terms that are going to come up in your studies, in your readings throughout your education when you look at research, and also sometimes when you're just reading about everyday common things in the paper and trying to understand how you should vote, or what you should press for, or what you want to see change in a society. These are important terms for you. And